Hey everyone, and welcome to Earth to No Man's Sky, where I take a real life place and turn it into a No Man's Sky base. Now, this idea stemmed from this planet that I discovered some weeks ago. When I first discovered these so called floating islands, I was blown away. I thought they looked amazing. They feature rivers and waterfalls. It's straight out of Avatar. Come to find out that this is the only place in the game that you're going to find rivers and waterfalls. And I've also recently learned that these islands will move, and they have moved in the past. Depending on what they update in the game, they can move. But that's not going to stop me from building my first base on one of these floating islands because I've got an awesome idea. If you're familiar with Fallingwater, you know that it sits over a river at the edge of a waterfall. This is the perfect spot, really the only spot to build it. So rather than this be just another long, drawn-out time-lapse, or a tutorial video on how to do different things, I'd rather use the time to tell you a little bit about Frank Lloyd Wright and about Fallingwater, while we watch Past Sean attempt to recreate this masterpiece. I have to tell you first that it was honestly painful editing weeks, actually more than a month of work down to mere minutes. But anyway, here we go. Frank Lloyd Wright is considered by many to be the most influential architect of the modern era. Born in Wisconsin in 1867, Frank would eventually call Illinois home. Frank was married 3 times and had 7 biological children. Apparently, he was a bit of a ladies' man, but that's another story. What I will mention is that one of his sons, John, went on to invent Lincoln logs. And I'm just now realizing that playing with Lincoln logs as a kid likely laid the foundation for my passion for building and appreciation for architecture. Honestly, Lincoln logs is possibly the reason why I love building bases in No Man's Sky. It's wild, but apparently I've come full circle. Frank is credited with developing the first true American style of architecture, the prairie style, which features long horizontal lines and the use of natural materials. His favorite color, Cherokee red, which is used in a lot of his designs, was said to have been inspired by the red earth of the American Southwest. He was also heavily influenced by Japanese design and artwork. He also developed a sort of logo, which can be seen on his drawings and additionally on some of his buildings in the form of a single red ceramic tile. This red square, as it became known, was inspired by Japanese printmaking. For whatever reason, Fallingwater never received a red square, but it does have the signature red floor in the kitchen. Frank became an architect having never earned a degree, attending only 1 semester of college, and having never graduated high school. He gained his architectural knowledge while working on the job as a draftsman and a designer for 6 years, prior to opening his independent practice in 1893. It's wild that you could become an architect by basically working under one for a while, and then apparently you could just call yourself an architect. No questions asked. Crazy. Frank's career spanned 70 years and included more than 1,000 projects. However, he had several highs and lows in his career. In his late 60s, after the Great Depression, he was broke and considered by most to be outdated and washed up. He had designed only 2 projects in 6 years. Luckily, Fallingwater would be his next project and would not only revive his career, but kick off his most prolific period. Fallingwater was commissioned by the Kaufman family, who owned a department store that would eventually be incorporated into Macy's. Located in Mill Run, Pennsylvania, on the Bear Run River, the site was a former summer house for the Kaufman's employees. But after the Great Depression, few could afford to visit the retreat. But apparently the Kaufmans were doing just fine financially. So they decided to build a weekend home for their family in the same area. Enter Frank Lloyd Wright. If the story is to be believed, after visiting the property in 1934, Frank agreed to start work on designing the home for the Kaufmans. But after 9 months of assumed lack of progress, the Kaufmans grew impatient. So one day, Mr. Kaufman called up Frank and told him he'd be driving to his office to check out the progress in person. Apparently, Frank only then got to work on the plans. Frank's employees set him up with the plot map, then Frank got to work putting his ideas to paper. It said that he had worked out the design in his head over the last 9 months. Frank's employees apparently marveled at the speed to which Frank worked. He was able to complete the plans for Fallingwater in the 2 hours it took Mr. Kaufman to drive to the office. I don't know about you, but I'm a skeptic. I find Frank Lloyd Wright fascinating. I do think that he was a sort of genius, but the more I dig into Fallingwater, the more I realize just how complicated it is and how unlikely this story is, sadly. I mean, I guess it's possible he had a photographic memory, but it's also possible he simply embellished the truth due to arrogance. When Frank was later questioned about the impressive speed at which he produced his many designs, Frank was quoted as saying, "Why, I just shake the buildings out of my sleeves." Anyway, it's also rumored that the Kaufmans didn't know Frank was planning to build the home on top of the river until this impromptu visit. Surely it must have taken some convincing, as it's reported the Kaufmans originally envisioned the home would have a view of the river and waterfall from a distance. However, Frank's philosophy was that a building should complement its environment and incorporate nature. He also coined the term organic architecture. It was a truly revolutionary idea, and I imagine this was a way of him promoting that idea. Construction of Fallingwater began in April of 1936. It would be no easy task building the nearly 5,000 square foot home and additional 4,000 plus square feet of terraces on the very edge of a river and waterfall. This is largely possible because the structure was built on top of bedrock. Frank's designs are always connected to nature. There are several places where the bedrock and boulders could have been excavated, but instead, Frank would incorporate it, showcase it. Frank also felt it was important to construct the home using local sandstone. The main house was completed in only 15 months. The Kaufmans would spend roughly $155,000 to build Fallingwater and eventually a nearby guest house. Today, that would be over $3 million. Fallingwater is truly an amazing engineering feat, but the structure isn't without flaws. It's common knowledge that many of Frank's structures had issues, including leaky roofs. So it should be no surprise that building on top of a river would result in even greater moisture problems. The Kaufmans would eventually nickname their beloved home Rising Mildew. Telling you right now, man, it's going to take a lot of restraint to not rename this base Rising Mildew. I'm going to hold off for now. Additionally, some of the structure was severely under-engineered, specifically the large cantilevered portion of the first floor, which is suspended over the river. You have to understand that rebar reinforced concrete was still relatively new, and while cantilevers weren't new, they were never built using this material to this scale before. This was recognized by Mr. Kaufman during construction. He was concerned, and he even hired additional engineers who ultimately suggested reinforcing the structure. But Frank completely dismissed their concerns, and apparently continued on with construction as originally planned. Arrogant. Okay, to be fair, I did also come across an article that mentioned maybe there was some disagreement between the contractors and Frank about what type of rebar to use and how much, and maybe a contractor went rogue and did what he wanted to do despite the plans. I'm not sure exactly what happened. Ultimately, what we do know is that upon completion, the first floor almost immediately cracked. Now, this next part almost sounds like an admission of guilt, because he could have easily thrown the contractors under the bus, but instead, he tries to reassure the Kaufmans and tells them that the house is simply settling in. Fast forward to 1994, and apparently the house was still settling in, because they measured one section had settled by almost 7 inches. So in 2000, a major restoration began, which involved reinforcing the first floor to prevent further movement. All of the stone flooring, the stone tiles, they all had to be painstakingly removed to be later reinstalled after repairs. And that made me think of something that happened while I was building this base. I had just finished building the first floor. I went back into the basement to kind of tweak some things. I had accidentally or inadvertently color glitched one of the floor squares. It was as if Frank himself came to me in the game and gifted me his signature Cherokee red color, because I couldn't replicate the color, and yet there it was. And I got excited. I ran with it. I had to remove one by one each floor square on the main level and replace it with a copied square from the basement. Eventually, I came out of my stupor and realized, like I mentioned before, that color, it's only in the kitchen. So I had to go back and undo everything, minus the kitchen. Oh, that made me laugh. I just had to share it. Anyway, they've had to do some repairs. Fallingwater, it's not perfect, but it's still considered a masterpiece, and it's still considered revolutionary in many ways. The house showcases a design principle that Frank developed and referred to as compression and release. With modern homes, you often see the main entrance as a focal point to the house, and when you enter, ideally it's an open space. But with Fallingwater, it's actually the complete opposite. The main entrance is almost hidden, off to the side. It's not showcased. And when you do enter, the hall is narrow and it's dark. This is intentional. This is the compression. When you enter the large living space with the high ceilings, large windows, and lots of natural light, you're released from that dark hall. It gives you a real sense of freedom. You're free to move around in this large space, and there's almost panoramic views of nature, or floating islands in my case. This compression and release was actually pretty difficult to replicate in No Man's Sky. The game gives you all the necessary Lincoln log pieces, but Lincoln logs, they were never designed to build complex structures like Fallingwater. Now, I love the idea behind compression and release, but it's reported that in some of the bedrooms and halls, the ceiling can be as low as 6 foot 4 inches. Frank apparently said a person only needs 6 inches above their head, so he designed spaces to that premise. But he wouldn't use the future occupants of the space as this sort of human scale. He always used his own height. And Frank wasn't a tall man. He reported his height as 5 foot 8.5 inches. He was quoted as saying, "If I had been taller, this scale might have been different." Are you sensing a pattern here yet? So, admittedly, the ceiling height is a tough one for me because when I got to the second level where we have these low ceiling areas, I really didn't want to lower the ceilings because it just looks so awkward. But then I found videos and pictures of people, and it really does look that awkward. So, I'm going to try to stay authentic, and I'm using my character as the scale. No, his name is not Frank, but he's going to have to do. So I lowered the ceilings where it calls for it anyway. It definitely can look a little cramped and a little awkward, but hey, that's what Frank wants. That's what Frank gets. And that pretty much goes for everything in the home. When Frank designed a home, he designed most everything inside it. This included the cabinetry, the furniture, even things like light fixtures. In the case of Fallingwater, the task of furnishing the house took an additional year after the home was constructed. Luckily, Fallingwater still contains these furnishings and is considered the only Frank Lloyd Wright house to still contain all of the original furnishings and artwork. I'm doing my best to replicate these built-ins and furnishings as I go, but since No Man's Sky is pretty limited with such things, I have to get a little creative. I found myself using the ruined pieces throughout the home. It all started with the U-shaped half wall above the iconic stairs that go down to the river. The ruined gateway was the closest match. At first I thought it was a little clunky, a little odd, but it worked better than anything else I had tried. Next, I needed something to serve as a structural post in the living room. But I realized that the ruined pieces have that weathered stone look that I think Frank would appreciate. So then I just kept finding more uses for the ruined pieces, and it turned into a sort of theme throughout the house. I think I may be most proud of this curved wall above the staircase. Initially, I was certain I wouldn't be able to replicate a curved wall, let alone one that has a sort of opening on the second floor where you can look down onto the staircase. The curved ruined wall was the perfect solution. And the theme continues into the master bedroom, where again, I couldn't find a way to replicate the fireplace with anything else. It's not perfect, but I think it bears a close enough resemblance. I wouldn't be happy with simply placing the standard fireplace against a wall. As I'm wrapping up work on my very own Rising Mildew, I just have a couple more things to mention. Frank would go on to design over 500 more projects after Fallingwater in the following 24 years. That's roughly half of his total works completed after the age of 70. He worked right up to his death in 1959 at age 91. And in 2019, Fallingwater and 7 other Frank Lloyd Wright works became UNESCO World Heritage Sites. That's pretty amazing considering other examples of World Heritage Sites include the Pyramids of Egypt, the Great Wall of China, and the Roman Colosseum. A World Heritage Site must have outstanding universal value to humanity to be recognized. Fallingwater is truly outstanding, and I hope I'm doing it justice. Originally, I had no intentions of making this a history lesson, but I stumbled across so much history and so many interesting facts that I just got pulled in. I don't think you can truly appreciate Fallingwater without knowing the whole story. But I also realized that combining history with No Man's Sky, I'm not sure it works. But anyway, I'm not done yet. There's still a lot more to do. At least until I hit the component limit, I've got to be getting close. And if there's enough interest, I'll make more videos and share the location. But that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Safe travels.